There's just so many dynamics that go into a turn, and we ask them to be on the very ball of their foot, which is their highest releve. And balancing and the coordination and strength that takes is incredibly insane. And then we ask them to do it together in the same rotation.
At the same time as other people?
At the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe there's 20 kids on the floor and they all have to do it at the exact same time. Same angles. Don't fall off your releve. You have to balance. And sometimes this can be 10 to 15 seconds long that they're holding up on that highest releve of their foot. So it's very, very challenging and difficult.
Welcome to Fitter Every Day, the show. We break fitness into bite-sized bits to help make you fitter every day. You might notice a little bit of echo. That's because we have a special guest, and I am the guest here. So we're joined by Richelle Morrissey, who is one of the owners of Dancin with Roxie in Ankeny, which is a really high-level dance studio in Ankeny that's right across the way. Sean's kids are all three of them dancers at Dancin with Roxie, so we trust them with our own family and flesh and blood. But we are in the dance studio, and this dance studio, it's hard surfaces, so if you hear a little bit of echo, that's why. But anyway, thank you for Richelle for having us, so welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we wanted to come in here because I think one of the misconceptions with fitness and with dancers is that those two things a lot of times don't mix. Like, people don't associate dancers with athletes, because if you say, hey, I have a college athlete cousin, instantly in their head they're thinking like, oh, it's a soccer player or a football player, and they don't think dancer necessarily. And I know you're probably going to be biased in this question, but why are they wrong in thinking that dancers are not necessarily athletes?
There's a lot of different styles of dance. There's a lot of different avenues of dance. And sometimes there is more artistic forms of dance, and that is maybe a little less athletic than what we do. What we do is an all-star program. Our dancers are very athletic. We are training them for college dance teams. So what we're working on is their mental prep, their physical prep, emotional prep, making sure that they're explosive and dynamic and that they have endurance to be able to get through these really intense routines. So although there are forms of dance that maybe aren't as athletic as what we do, we are training in those more athletic forms and preparing these dancers for these collegiate programs.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And I say that really interesting because my wife and I had this conversation over pizza last night. And my wife was on the dance team with you. Yep. You guys have been good friends for a while. And we were talking about the difference because she had a cousin who was a dance major at Arizona, and Aaron was on the dance team at Iowa State. And from the outside perspective, those don't seem all that different because you're dancing more or less full-time as a sport, even though it's not a sanctioned sport within the NCAA, and then you're dancing full-time as a dance major. But Erin was telling me that it's really different in the application of what those are actually done as. So for the layman, which most of the people that are coming, if you are a normal listener of Fitter Every Day, you're listening to this because you like fitness and you're coming from that aspect. People that are listening from your aspect are saying, oh, duh, I know the difference. But for the layman's like me, what is the difference between someone who's like a dance major and someone who's on a competitive dance team?
There are differences. I'd say that the technical base is the same. You kind of have to take those same programming, the same classes to get to those two different places. However, they are different paths. The dance programs are going to be a little bit more ballet, modern focused, those classical styles of dance. And for the dance team programs, those are going to be more pom, jazz, hip hop, contemporary lyrical as well focused, but again, a little bit more athletic and demanding. They're packed full of skills and tricks, where a dance program is going to be really honing in on that technique and that solid foundation. So two amazing programs for dancers and options, but just very different in kind of what a dancer is looking for or prefers.
So that was one of the things that Aaron described. It's sort of like what you're saying, is that the dance programs are going to be more focused on, so like if you're a dance major going to an artistic school, they're going to be focused on more of how can we best enable the dancer to get the expression of the music, of the moment, what's the story being told, how do we best enable you to connote the emotion of this thing, the feeling of this thing, versus the dance team style is more, how can we make you as explosive and as consistent and as exciting and as sustainable throughout a routine as you can. So it's more about emotion versus athleticism is sort of like the difference between the two.
Yep.
So how did DWR, because when you think of dance studios, there's two buckets. How did you guys end up more in the all-star / competitive style, which is more training for college dance teams than it is training for being a dance major? Although, again, you said the base skills are more or less the same. Like,
yes.
I would imagine the sports equivalent of that is like, if you're gonna play basketball or you're gonna play volleyball, you have to be both tall, you have to be athletic, you have to be able to jump, you have to be able to change direction, and you have to have good hand-eye coordination, basketball and volleyball. If you don't have those base things, it doesn't matter. You're gonna be bad at both. But if you have both of them, once you get to a certain level, then when you're starting to get the last 5% is where you start to veer. So how did DWR get into this more competitive lane and less in the, I would say, artistic or academic lane?
We opened the studio. My sister opened the studio 18 years ago, and when she did that...
Sister named?
Roxana. Roxie, yeah. When she did that, it was very much more focused on the creative side, the performance side, especially in Iowa. That's kind of what is popular here. That's what we have access to. So that's kind of where it all started. And about 5 years ago, we realized that our kids were really looking to be on those collegiate teams and realized that we have to find a way to help them get there. And that this one track wasn't going to do that all by itself. So that's when we started doing our research, figuring out what other options would be. We came across the All-Star World, which is what really caught our eye was the Dance Worlds. And it's basically...
Dance Worlds, that's a competition, yes?
Yes, yep. And it's in Orlando, and it's international, so there's teams from all over the world that are there competing, and it's a really high-level competition, and it's all-star based, where they're packing in those skills. They are doing very intense routines. These routines are 2 minutes and 15 seconds long at most, and they are very intense routines for our dancers to push through. It challenges their skills and performance. It really pushes them as athletes. So when we found that realm, we decided to go for it. We took our kids there for the first time. We didn't really know what we were doing. Just decided we had a lot of dance team background and knowledge, being that our studio has a lot of former collegiate athletes that teach here. So we just decided to jump into it and try it out. We had a ton of success and saw our kids grow tremendously as athletes in just a weekend and in that season. And that kind of just started that new path. We still do both, and we still train dancers in both directions if they want to do a college dance program or collegiate dance teams. We have both options. However, this option for All-Star has really become our niche and has become something that we're super passionate about and excited for, and something that all of our dancers are really loving, and we are placing a lot of kids on collegiate dance teams.
So what would you say the struggle, because a switch like that isn't going to be something that just like happens, you know, like it's not something that, again, the volleyball basketball thing is that they're similar but different. And if you're only training volleyball players and then all of a sudden you switch to coaching basketball players, there are differences in there, and that I would imagine in your head you have like, oh, I kind of know what we're going to get into, and then you do it and you're like, oh, ugh, I did not expect this. What are the things when you went to make that more all-star focus that you ran into that you didn't expect you were going to run into? What are the problems that you kind of like bumped into along the way?
I mean, we're still running into problems and trying to grow and learn every single day. We try and really make sure that we're taking the proper training to make sure that we're excelling ourselves too, to make ourselves the best coaches that we can for the kids. But some of those initial issues were, you know, turns and turn sets for dancers are huge in the All-Star world.
Okay, so again, dummy here. So turns, it's when it's that actually standing in one spot and just spinning around.
Yes.
And then turn set, is that the setup for it, or is that just where you're going for doing one of them and doing another?
Yep, it's a turn set would be like doing this combination into something else, which are difficult and challenging combinations that we throw at our dancers, and then we ask them to do it all together.
So one thing about this is, so dear listener, if you're thinking that this is not that hard, I challenge you. I've done this before. Okay, go into your kitchen on a slightly slippery floor, and you have to start facing the fridge, and spin around, stay facing the fridge without that foot moving, without changing angle, without changing anything. And now at the same time, put an apple on your head and do the same thing again. Like that's the type of difficulty level that you have to do it. So it's not like, it sounds like turn up, big deal, whatever. Like it's substantially more difficult than that, especially as you're putting skills together.
There's just so many dynamics that go into a turn, and we ask them to be on the very ball of their foot, which is their highest releve. And balancing and the coordination and strength that takes is incredibly insane. And then we ask them to do it together and in the same rotation.
At the same time as other people.
At the same time.
Yeah.
And maybe there's 20 kids on the floor and they all have to do it at the exact same time. Same angles. Don't fall off your releve. You have to balance. And sometimes this can be 10 to 15 seconds long that they're holding up on that highest releve of their foot. So it's very, very challenging and difficult. So it takes a lot of strength and balance and stability to be able to accomplish those turn sets. But that's something that we ran into too, is like our dancers just weren't quite where they needed to be for that level compared to the competition at the Dance Worlds and at NDA All-Star Regional or Nationals. And so that was something we really had to focus on is, okay, how are we going to drive this training home, and how are we going to push them in all these aspects? And turns is just one small portion of that, but just an example. And then the other thing was choreography and staging. There's so much that goes into that, and those are all points on a score sheet. And if they're not executing that, or the choreographer didn't execute that, or us as coaches aren't revamping those things to give them the max amount of points, we're still in the learning process of how do you achieve the max amount of points?
So this is curious, because I would imagine even in the dance world, it starts to get a little bit confusing when you get from even the dancers to the parents that are less involved, whether it's mom or dad, and then like their friends, and it starts to get a little bit confusing. So for those that are not in it, when you talk about points and you talk about execution, so this is a competitive thing. Like you are trying to win a thing. And in order to win a thing, you have to have a criteria, and you have to have a winner and a loser or placing on top of that. How does one score points at, say, Worlds? What is the scoring system set up like, and what are they judging off of?
So there's a bunch of different categories. Some of it is execution. So that could be execution of technique or performance. Creativity, which is going to come down to the choreographers and the coaches. Is it unique? Is it something different that they haven't seen before?
And is that part of it feels, just the creativity part feels a little subjective?
There's a lot that's actually subjective in the dance world, unfortunately, which is what makes it difficult. And you're trying to figure out, what is a judge going to think is creative? What haven't they seen before? And you don't know who those judges are, their background, when you're doing all of this.
And you're planning this 10 months in advance.
Yeah. So just trying to push ourselves in creativity too, and try and make something as creative as we can make it, and we put out there what we can, and hopefully they love it. It might be technique, it might be overall impression, and that's where some of those things get subjective too. Technique is technique. It's either good or it's not, and that one's pretty cut or dry, but the other categories can be pretty subjective in the dance world.
So is there then 10 points per category and you get X number of points overall? Like, what is the scoring system like?
Usually it's like 100 points overall. Each score sheet is different depending on categories and depending on competitions.
And that's like pom versus hip hop versus whatever, fill in the blank. And there's just different weights for different things.
Or when we go to NDA All-Star Nationals in Dallas in January, it's a different score sheet than it is for the Dance World or the Dance Summit in Orlando.
Will you use the same routines for both?
We do use the same routines, but in that time in between, we have to adapt to the different score sheets.
How do the girls take to the adaptation, or dancers, it's not just girls, but how do the dancers then adapt from that? I would imagine 5 years in, they're a little more used to it. How was that process the first time, communicating that, hey girls, you've done a really good job. Now we have to do it different. Like, how was that process the first time that you realized you had to change it from depending on the score sheet?
It's a difficult process and can be very overwhelming. And it's still, our athletes do a really good job of of using that skill set. And it's something that we're working to develop with them every single day from the time they're 4 years old, of adapting and doing it quickly. But it really takes a positive mindset. And sometimes it might change 6 different times, and being able to keep your mind in the right place to do that. Or when we're cleaning and doing all this little detailed work, it honestly comes down to almost 90% mental and their positive mindset. And so it's something that we work on, is their mindsets with them as well, and just saying, hey, we're going to scrap half of this routine today, and we just need you all in the space that you're positive, you're cheering each other on, we are all working together, and we're going to make this, and it'll be better at the end of the day. It's a lot of work right now, and it's overwhelming in the moment, but it'll be better for the end of the day.
And that feels like one of the things that is pretty common with sport. And I think as the dancers get, because this has only been, probably feels like a long time. It's only been 5 years. And so even the oldest dancers have only been doing this since the last 4 or 5 years. And they start really, really little, which we're going to get back to that. But that feels like normal everyday sport. I mean, because coming from my background with football is you're playing a team, and that team in week 2 has a really good defensive line and a pretty bad secondary. Well, that would make sense that we probably throw at the secondary and not run into that defensive line. So we're going to change it a little bit based on who we're playing. And then you play in week 3, they reverse it. They have a really good defensive secondary and a really pretty bad defensive line. We should probably run a little bit more. It's the same offense, pretty much, but you're affecting it different ways based on what's the best outcome. And that happens across all sports, and including dance. It's just depending on the opponent, which your opponent in this case would be the score sheet, is what is most vulnerable on this score sheet for us to take advantage of.
Correct.
We have to switch it up a little bit, just like an offense in football or basketball or soccer or whatever has to switch up their thing against an opponent that they're playing at the same time. So that's just sports.
And that kind of brings me to a different point too, that when we go compete at NDA All-Star Nationals or at the Dance World or the Dance Summit, there's 2 separate days. You have prelims and you have finals. And if you make finals, you get the judges' feedback on your prelim performance, and you need to take that and fix it and apply it. And you only have 24 hours to do so, sometimes not even. As well as also some of these kids are dancing in 4 routines, so we're doing it times 4, 5, 6. So that is another piece of that too, that makes them incredible athletes in that same way of, it makes dance a little bit more athletic in this aspect of, they have to take those corrections and apply them and take the judges' feedback, and we fix it right there on the spot.
And that feels like where general athleticism is a really strong thing, as opposed to memorization and routine, where one of the things that I don't like sometimes about sports is the shut up, work harder type thing, which is fine. But if the shut up, work harder, so let's say basketball example, a person practices free throws, and they practice free throws, and they practice free throws, and they practice standing at one spot, shooting, and standing in one spot, shooting, and standing in one spot, shooting, but they never actually practice what is it like to shoot over a defender. They never actually get into the aspect of coming off a screen and running around and actually catching it and shooting in the moment, where it's sort of an unpredictable thing. Like a free throw is the only thing in basketball where it's the same every time. Even if you catch an open 3, it's not going to be exactly in the same spot along the arc. So you just have to be an athlete. Like, you have to practice enough randomness and be athletic enough to just adapt to this new thing. Like, I didn't know that I was going to be running to my left, stopping and shooting in this particular aspect. So I just got to be athletic enough to do it. So in the dance world, it feels the same as if you just practice a routine and only just blindly memorize the routine. It's sort of like that person that's only practicing ever unguarded shots, where you're a good unguarded shot shooter, you're not a good basketball player. And in the dance world, if you only practice this routine and just think about only the routine, then you're a good routine performer in this one vein. But when you have to change something, if you're not athletic enough or not trusting yourself to be athletic enough, then that growth is going to be stunted of not being able to deviate from that groove that you dug yourself a little bit. So that feels like one of those things when you're talking about like the athleticism part, is if you had a group of really athletic girls or really athletic dancers, that makes the changes substantially easier. And I would imagine the judges then go, whoa, you guys just went from this thing last time, you added 2 extra turns, you moved the formation a little bit, and there's 2 extra jumps in here, and you added that in what, a day? Wow, okay. So I'd imagine that is a big part of it, is just getting more well-rounded athletes who are technically sound, who can just go, all right, what do we got to do? 2 more turns? All right, I got it.
Yep.
Like that type of thing.
That's exactly what we are striving for and working towards with our athletes. And I think it's just a really cool thing to watch them be able to do that and to see them be able to grow in literally a day and challenge themselves like that. And the outcome is that they're better athletes and better dancers the next day than at the end of the day. So I think that's really cool.
So you mentioned a while back, and I said we're going to circle back to it, is these kids have been doing it since they're 4. Why?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we start training at 2. So
You're
some
so
of
little.
these kids, some of these kids have been dancing since they were 2, and by the time their dance career is over as senior in high schools, meaning in the studio, they've danced for 15 plus years and trained for 15 plus years. I think that it's a great activity. It gives them something consistent to do even when they're little, and gives them that dedication. And it's a year-long sport, so when kids commit to it, they commit for the entire season and the entire year, and that's just that constant persistentness and having to put in the work outside they're good life skills. So that's one of the reasons why for dance, I think that our kids choose to start competing at that high level at the age of 4 or 5 is because they watch the older girls and they watch those senior teams and think, well, I want to do this. I want to be this. I want that opportunity to dance on one of the top college dance teams in the nation. And the dance world is very highly competitive. So if you don't do that necessarily, you may or may not end up in that position at the end. So they're just starting younger and younger, and the dance world and the talent is insane every single season. My mind is always blown when we go and watch all of these other teams from all over the country. It's crazy, the amount of talent. So that's kind of why I think they start training that young. But also, if it were just a parent deciding that they wanted to put their kid in an activity, it's a great weekly activity that teaches discipline and structure, but also fun and coordination, and gives them some time to burn some energy. And it is something that gets them moving, and they're not sitting on the couch or in front of a screen. So
one other thing I was thinking about it. So if you start dancing and it's more or less year round, how do you avoid overuse injuries from that? Because I would imagine, and this is a thing that it feels like the pendulum, at least in the more conventional sports world, as far as like your baseball, football, basketball, whatever, the pendulum swung really hard like 5 or 6 years ago, where if you were a basketball player and you did anything else other than basketball, there is no chance that you're going to be as good at basketball. And then that kind of has sort of swung back a little bit because you're having ACL tears younger and younger, and you're having hip injuries younger and younger. So how do you guys prevent or intend to prevent overuse injuries from kids dancing at such a young age? Like what are things that you've kind of tried to put in place to make sure that if a girl is dancing, your ankles, hips, and knees are going to be doing a lot of impact. So how do you guys prevent against those things as best you can to not screw up joints on young kids? Yep, their health of their bodies is really important to us. So making sure that we always tell them, you have to listen to your body. If your body is saying no today, it's saying no today, and we need to take a break. They see physical therapists. They do a lot of extra additional training strength-wise. That's also a big thing with dance, is that they want to be so flexible. So they'll sit there and they're split, but that's not necessarily healthy if they're not doing the strengthening behind it to keep their joints and muscles safe as well. So just kind of trying to touch on all of those things. I wish we could do even more. That would be great if we had 1 million hours in the day and we could do even more. But we try and give them as much as we can. I did a gyrotonic certification, which is a strength and stretching program that uses a pulley machine with weights on it. And I do that for a lot of our dancers. It's it mimics movement underwater. Okay. So it feels really good on their bodies. It's very low impact and just lets them move through, especially their hips and knees and feet, without feeling stuck or crunchy or overusing their muscles or joints. So that's something that we've done to help kind of keep their bodies healthy, but also just
making sure that we're in touch with them and they're in touch with their bodies and drinking water and eating healthy and trying to take care of themselves too. So.
And one of the things so Emily Nutzman, which is my business partner, Sean, who's been on this channel, Emily Nutzman's actually a coach here.
She is.
And one of the things that she was talking about, and she's started the process of working with, is to supplement a lot of the work that you're already doing with stuff that we're already doing.
Yep.
Because the girls that are part of the dance team here are athletes, point blank, full stop. And when what we work with athletes, with our youth athletes in Acceleration Iowa and with the Goldfinch Speed stuff that we're doing, a lot of that comes from years and years of training with the more conventional sports. Well, if this is working to strengthen and prevent injuries and all the things that come with that, Emily was laying like, hey, why don't we bring that and have the dancers do that as well? And so to make sure that we continue the process of like, if you want to build Explosion, that's all we've been doing is building Explosion for 15 years. But also to increase the stuff that you guys have already been doing of like taking a hard look at how can we prevent overuse injuries? Well, if you have a stronger set of hip muscles, they're probably going to be more resistant to injury. So one of the other things that we were I wanted to get you guys on here for is that we're going to be doing a partnership where we're actually having your dance girls do a program that's specific to them to kind of build a strength and allow the explosiveness that we've already been doing to be sort of imparted. And Emily's sort of like the connection point between there because she's been doing it for forever. So that was one thing how can we help and how can your girls benefit from our program, and how can we benefit from learning about different style athletes? So I don't know, that was one thing that we were trying to be able to get set up, and that's actually going to be in one of your summer programs this year.
Yes. Yep.
So what are the summer programs that you guys have going? Because this will go out, we're recording this in May, this will go out early June. What are the summer programs that you guys have going on? And then what other things, like if you had a magic wand that you wish you could have a girl do if they had 1 million hours in the day?
So we have a 6-week summer program that starts in June, goes through mid-July. And I mean, it ranges from 2-year-olds all the way up to 18-year-olds and kind of caters to each different level of dance and what everybody's kind of looking for. Our older kids will train technically throughout the summer, just kind of training in all those aspects that we talked about to help support their dance careers when we start back full swing into learning routines and making sure they're prepared for that. And then we're really excited to have Emily on board and you guys on board to do a great program with us too to help strengthen our dancers and making sure that they are safe. And I think that's going to be really beneficial for them as well. I would say that if there's anything that I could have them do even more of, it would be movement. Improv, even though they would hate that. And improv is basically just turning on some music and letting them dance.
Dance
and
around.
You feel the music and explore movement and different shapes that you can make with your body. And then also the strengthening aspects of balance, stability, strength, explosion, endurance. Like I said, just preparing them for through the summer for, when we hit those harder times, especially come January, May, that's when our season really amps up. So just preparing their bodies for that and being able to execute choreography in those routines when we get to that point.
So if there is someone who's if they've got a kid and that kid's interested in dance, how do they get started with you guys? What's the process if they did want to enroll with DWR?
Yeah. We have a great website, so they can visit our website, dancewithroxie.com. There's a lot of information on there, and there's also a portal that you can register for class and kind of pick classes. But if you needed a little bit more information or wanted some guidance on what would be best for your dancer, just reaching out via email, which is dancingwithroxie@hotmail.com. We could get them information. We have all these great, beautiful booklets that have all this information in them about summer classes, fall classes, and what would be right for their dancer, as well as we're always happy to help people pick and choose the right path for their dancer.
Cool. Well, thanks, Richelle, for having us in.
Thank you.
Beautiful studio, looking at all the trophies across everything.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to Fitter Every Day. For more information on our programs, locations, or any of the content that we have to offer, go to www.goldfinchathletics.com. And if you want us delivered directly to your mailbox, go to the newsletter tab while you're at the website. For any information or links mentioned in this episode, check the show notes. We'll check you next episode.